Welcome, everyone. My name is Alicia Jackson, and I'm the Instructional Design Specialist with ASFPM, the Association of State Floodplain Managers. I'd like to welcome you to the National Policy Briefing for October 2025. Before we begin today, there are a couple of routine admin items to mention. These are monthly high-level briefings that will take about 30 minutes of your time. They are recorded, so if you need to reference them in the future, they will become available to you in about a week, if not sooner. There is a Q&A feature within Zoom that you should see on your screen, usually near the bottom. You can write out your questions and we will take them at the end as time allows. Lastly, this policy briefing is not eligible for CECs. Today, our agenda items consist of a Washington update, NFIP and FEMA, ASCE 2424 update, and the 2027 International Building Codes. Starting us off today with our first agenda item is Elizabeth Duffy, the ASFPM Washington Liaison, taking us through Washington updates. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Alicia. So we are in day 30 of the government shutdown, which also means day 30 of a lapse in the NFIP. It is currently the longest full government shutdown in history. The longest shutdown was 34 days in the first Trump administration back in 2018 and 19, but that was only a partial shutdown because parts of the government were funded prior to the end of the fiscal year. But regardless, tens of thousands of federal employees have been furloughed and more are working without pay. A quick recap. The House passed a continuing resolution until November 21st, extending the funding levels from the previous fiscal year, which was a continuation of the funding levels from the previous fiscal year for that, so FY 2024. They passed that on September 19th and then left town and have yet to return to DC. The Senate remains in session and has brought that House passed continuing resolution bill to the Senate floor for a vote 13 times and has failed each time to reach the necessary 60 vote threshold to stop debate and bring it to the full chamber for a vote. We're all well aware of each side's talking points. The Democrats want the extension of the Affordable Care Act subsidies, a reversal of the recently passed rescissions package, and an overturning of parts of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Republicans have countered with pass the continuing resolution and then we can talk. The first full federal employee monthly paychecks will be skipped this week, and several federal assistance programs will run out of money on Saturday, most notably SNAP and WIC. This past Monday, the largest union that represents federal employees urged Congress to pass a clean CR and reopen the government immediately. And on Tuesday, Vice President Vance met with Senate Republican leadership to discuss updates. Neither side has so far wavered or blinked in this standoff, so here we sit. There are a few paths forward to end this impasse. First, Senate Democrats could break ranks and vote with Republicans. There are 53 Republicans in the Senate, but Rand Paul will never vote for the continuing resolution. So, to reach that 60 vote threshold and end cloture to move the CR to the Senate floor for a vote, 8 Democrats need to vote in favor of the bill. So far, Senators Fetterman, King, and Cortez Masto have voted for the bill each time it was brought to the floor. But that leaves 5 more Democrats that are needed to join them. It's going to take some concessions to bring 5 of them over to the side of voting for the bill. However, given how long the shutdown has gone on, the current deadline of November 21st is not enough time for Congress to come back and complete all the work necessary to fully fund the government. A second option is the Republicans agree to modify the House continuing resolution by adding ACA subsidies. If they do that in the Senate, the bill will need to go back to the House for another vote, and Speaker Johnson will have to ensure 218 votes for that bill to pass and then send it to the president in order to reopen the government. Some Republicans then may choose not to vote for a modified CR, but that may mean that some Democrats would vote for it, which would be helpful in getting to that critical 218 vote threshold. A third option is for them to do rifle shot passages of targeted appropriations bills or programs, like agreeing to fund the Department of Defense or the SNAP program. That was floated this week, and Senate Majority Leader Thune shut that down pretty hard yesterday in a rather fiery exchange with Senator Gallego from Arizona, because it lessens the pressure on forcing Congress to have a full reopening because the loudest constituencies or the most pressing issues are funded one at a time. And so that could cause this shutdown to drag on a little bit longer. Another option is for them to continue with omnibus or minibus appropriations packages, where they take single appropriations bills and lump them together into a larger bill. The Senate tried that last week, but the Democrats voted that down. And a final option is for the Senate to generate another longer term continuing resolution that goes into early next year, allowing for more time for the FY26 budget negotiation process to take place and could possibly include some of the concessions that the Democrats are seeking in order to end the shutdown. This would also give equally important opportunities for Congress to cool off if we move the continuing resolution into January of next year. In the last couple of days, though, things have begun to move, and the mood is starting to become a bit more urgent here in Washington, D.C. Bipartisan Senate talks have picked up, with Senate Majority Leader saying this morning that he expects to engage with a group of Democrats in the very near future. There have been bipartisan talks that have been ongoing all month long between those who are outside the Republican and the Democrat power circles, the moderates of both parties, so to speak, like Senators Murkowski, Shaheen, Peters, Rosen, Rounds, and Susan Collins from Maine. Some of the details of those efforts have been floated in the last couple days. And what they're speculating is we could look at a continuing resolution that runs into January 2026 and may include a 2-year extension of the Affordable Care Act subsidies. It looks like the Senate may be prepared to present an alternative like this sometime by this time next week. But like I mentioned, if either a modified House passed option or a newly generated Senate option passes the Senate, it will have to go back to the House for consideration. Speaker Johnson has the full House on a 48-hour recall notice, meaning he'll give them a 2-day heads up to head back to DC. And he will need to ensure that he gets 218 votes to pass a bill and send it to the president to be signed into law in order to end this government shutdown. The CR extension, along with the addition of ACA subsidies, would be a reason for many hardline Republicans to vote no on a continuing resolution. While, like I said, those same reasons might be the reason why some Democrats vote in favor for it. The hurdle, however, that needs to be overcome is the communication and the coordination that will be required between Speaker Johnson and Minority Leader Jeffries. And their relationship has taken rather a hard hit during the shutdown, with some name calling and some less than favorable feelings towards one another. In any event, the government shutdown is expected to continue for at least another week. So while the House has been on extended recess since September, the Senate has moved forward on a few issues. On October 7th, the Senate voted to confirm Dr. Ned Mamula to be director of the U.S. Geological Survey, but the shutdown has prevented him from being sworn in. The Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee favorably reported passage of S2245 to reauthorize the Digital Coast Act until 2030. This bill now needs to be voted on by the full Senate, and it's been placed on the calendar for consideration. The House bill, the companion bill to this one, H.R. 4256, passed committee last month and was placed on the House unanimous consent calendar for action by the full House once they return. And the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee also held a confirmation hearing for Tim Petty to be the Assistant Secretary at Commerce for NOAA. Next steps for him will be a vote to confirm him by the committee, and then he can be considered by the full Senate for confirmation. In the meantime, with the government unfunded, we're watching for further updates on the Disaster Relief Fund, which is running critically low. The latest report issued at the end of September listed the funding level at about $8.4 billion for staff deployments, aid, and other efforts, with an additional $1.1 billion to respond to unexpected future events. The shutdown has precluded an October update from being issued, but we know that in the last week, President Trump just approved over $40 million in total to go to Alaska, Nebraska, and North Dakota in response to summer and fall storms there. And this aid unlocks both individual and public assistance for those areas. So that's all for now. There's not a whole lot going on, but once the government manages to reopen, looks like we'll be doing Mach 3 with our hair on fire between now and the end of the year. And I'll turn it back to Alicia.
Thank you, Elizabeth. For our next topic discussing the NFIP and FEMA, we will hear from Meg Galloway, the ASFPM Senior Policy Advisor, and David Conrad, the ASFPM Water Resource Policy Specialist. Meg and David, go ahead when you're ready. You might be muted.
Thanks, Alicia.
Yep.
I'm going to start out on NFIP and FEMA issues, and then David will continue a little bit on that vein and bring up one other issue. I'm going to start with the highlights and lowlights of the ongoing government shutdown. which Elizabeth started the discussion. From the standpoint of NFIP, unlike recent past shutdowns, FEMA didn't issue a bulletin on the impacts of the shutdown on flood insurance. However, ASFPM was able to develop one based on past FEMA bulletins and some new guidance from the agencies that oversee lenders. We estimate roughly that 380,000 NFIP policies will be expiring every month. That could certainly be problematic as the shutdown drags on and or the nation experiences fall flooding events. ASFPM provided more information about what happens to the flood insurance during a lapse in the Policy Matters section of the most recent News and Views from, I think it's October 15th. So even prior to the current shutdown, things were moving kind of slow at FEMA, and it's hard to get timely and accurate information on the programs we track and support. While applications for some of the grants did move forward, CAP, dams, and EMPG, there were glitches in the grant conditions that were unacceptable to some states, and that was compounded by the inability of grantees to access the FEMA goal system by the end of the fiscal year to accept grants. And then due to the shutdown, there's no information on how these grants can move forward. The notice of funding opportunities for the CTP grants, which are usually the mapping grants, were not issued by the end of the fiscal year, though there is some hope that they may, once the government is up and running, they may move forward since the funding didn't expire at the end of the last fiscal years. Some grantees can continue their work on the CTP grants if they have existing funds that were that they were allowed to carry over into this fiscal year. As Elizabeth said, the disaster relief fund is critically low. The DRF is the appropriation which FEMA can use to fund eligible response and recovery efforts for major disasters that overwhelm state resources. Unless it's replenished by Congress, FEMA may not have enough money for upcoming disasters. So despite all the chaos in Washington, there continues to be ongoing legislative discussions on NFIP reauthorization, as well as the future of FEMA. Last month, we talked about a House Transportation and Infrastructure bill passed the FEMA Act, and the bipartisan bill focuses on improving FEMA by making it an independent cabinet level agency, and also proposes reforms to federal disaster mitigation, preparedness, and response and recovery programs. ASFPM has indicated to staff that we have reservations about some of the mitigation program changes, but some of those were already addressed in the latest draft, and we will continue working with the sponsors to improve it. However, it's not likely to go anywhere until the shutdown is over. Also of note, ASFPM responded to a request for information from Senators Cassidy and Booker of the Senate Banking Committee, and that RFI had 46 questions related to ideas for reforming the NFIP and FEMA. At this point, we don't have any indication that it's going anywhere soon. If you're looking for our response to the RFI, it can be found on the website. Additionally, the FEMA Review Council is still meeting, primarily working through their subcommittees, and they have one on federal-state coordination, which is to evaluate the roles of the federal and state governments in disaster management, to identify structural changes to enable national resilience. They have a disaster response and recovery assessment committee that's evaluating how FEMA could better serve as a supporting rather than a supplanting agency, and identify the necessary statutory changes to better serve the American people. The last subcommittee they have is the report writing committee, and they're already saying that the council will be late in submitting their report, but they aim to have it to the president by the end of the year. Okay, and I don't see David on yet.
Hey,
David's on.
Okay, so I'm going to segue over to David, who will provide information on a recent report by Neptune, which proposes to privatize flood insurance, and we fear the idea could become part of the council reform considerations. And he's also going to provide a little information on the California Flood Future Panel that he's been participating in. Okay, David.
hi, Meg. Yes. Dateline, Washington, D.C., October 30th, 2025, the day before Halloween. I've always wanted to start this with something like that. Anyway, as you may have heard, the Trump administration's FEMA Review Council, having had 3 publicly broadcast meetings, the last 2 in July and August, is now saying the council's report committee, they have 3 committees, I think Meg mentioned that. Their report committee is now drafting its report to the president and expects to have it completed toward the end of December. It is not known, at least to us, what it is likely to say, mainly because the council has kept an airtight, very close hold on whatever its recommendations may be. One question we have paid particular attention to is if there are changes at FEMA, what would the administration suggest for NFIP? In the 3 public sessions, NFIP, the flood program, was barely mentioned as a subject. ASFPM, in our comments to the Review Council, was very pointed in saying NFIP must be maintained as a central federal program to implement and coordinate flood risk management, which should not be broken up. Some of you have read or heard that one issue, which is apparently on the table, is the idea of privatizing flood insurance in a fairly major way. As Meg mentioned, I think the Neptune Insurance Company of St. Petersburg, Florida, early this month issued a report called Private Market Solution to Flood Insurance, Reducing Federal Flood Risk Through NFIP Reform. And I think we'll try to get that site up on the chat. Lays out a scenario that would, over a fairly short period of time, halt the sale of new NFIP policies. Well, it would immediately halt new policy sales to grow the private insurance market and to phase down NFIP eventually to being an insurance source of last resort to those high-risk residences that the private market cannot afford to insure. The report suggests that this high-risk category would only be about 5% of the total flood insurance policy base, and the Neptune Company claims the private insurance companies have superior and much less expensive means of rating flood insurance premiums and risks. ASFPM has long worked with the private insurance industry to support its attempts to carry flood risks, which have swelled and abated numerous times over the past 50 years. But we at ASFPM have severe doubts that the private industry would ever choose to try to hold nearly all the risk, as suggested by Neptune. Nowhere near. Last week, ASFPM wrote the FEMA Review Committee to that effect, and we are reaching out to other allies and organizations to share our many concerns about such a proposal. In addition, the American Property Casualty Insurers Association, whose members market over 80% of both the NFIP and private flood insurance policies, also wrote the council objecting to that proposal with a strong list of reasons as well. In the next month, we would expect to learn more about how this has been received by the council, Congress, and others, and it will be a significant concern of ASFPM going forward. This is not the direction that makes sense at this time. Meg mentioned that we wanted to alert the membership to a project that we're working on with the state of California. In June of this year, working through the University of California, Davis, and the California Office of Emergency Services and several other agencies, the state set in motion an expert panel, which we sit on, and the project is called Securing California's Flood Future, to really try to anticipate what it would mean if FEMA were severely weakened in a number of different ways, particularly in the flood arena, and try to anticipate those things, and then therefore help California think through what it may want to be doing in order to prepare for that. A first paper was issued September 2nd by the department at University of California and the panel. And a second paper is being worked on now, focusing on action items that the state could take to anticipate if FEMA begins to seriously withdraw its support for flood and disaster programs. And have to say, we are already seeing that weakening in mitigation programs, public assistance support, obviously NFIP insurance sales, and disaster relief funds right now due to the governments being closed. We are impressed with California's forethought here and believe this effort to be more than worthwhile given the uncertainties that the administration has injected now into federal insurance and mitigation and risk assessment, potentially mapping efforts. We understand California, Washington, and Oregon have at least had some low-level preliminary discussions about potentially trying to work somehow together to anticipate problems. And we bring this up to suggest that really seems to us all states should in some way begin to consider potential issues that and how they would affect states and local flood programs. We should not be flat-footed about this, and hope everyone will try to figure out ways to do a little of this anticipation and maybe work across borders to talk about it. And that makes it for me. Alicia, I'll pass it back.
I can take it back. Thank you both. Next, Chad Berginnis, the ASFPM Executive Director, will give an update on ASCE 2424 and the 2027 International Building Codes. Go ahead, Chad.
Thank you very much, Alicia. And thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. I hope everybody's having as good of a Halloween season as you can at this point. So a question that we've gotten several times at the ASFPM Executive Office to our policy team is, with the NFIP lapsed, with kind of the direction of the federal government, what are we trying to do to help facilitate building some capacity at the state and local level? And so this last topic of the day is one of those areas that we are, and that is getting ASCE 2424, as I like to call it, the nation's new flood resilience standards for building construction, into the 2027 International Building Code. And so right now, the International Code Council's code development process is happening, and that process is happening to take input and consider changes to the 2027 I-codes. And that, the two major parts of the I-codes are the International Building Code, which applies to commercial, industrial, and large multifamily residential, and then the International Residential Code that typically, I believe, governs 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 family residential structures that way. So, the where we sit today is we just had, and I think they may be even still going on or just literally concluded yesterday or today, the second code action hearings in Cleveland, Ohio, and or the committee action hearings. I apologize. At the first committee action hearings that were held in Orlando in May, a consortium of organizations, including ASFPM, was successful to get at least teed up for consideration the ASCE 2424 into the International Building Code. We were unsuccessful in getting it into the International Residential Code, I believe failing on a vote of 7-3, 7 against 3-4. So we had another opportunity this past week in Cleveland, and in Cleveland, unfortunately for the residential code, we ended up losing by one vote, a vote of 5-6 that way. And so where we sit now is that we have, at the conclusion of the committee action hearing number 2, we do have it teed up for the International Building Code, but not for the International Residential Code. There is then, in kind of this stage of hearings for consideration for the 2027 codes, we do have one more step, which is called the public comment hearing, and I believe that will be held in April in Hartford, Connecticut. And at the public comment hearing, eligible voters that basically include building officials will vote on proposed changes to the codes and can theoretically vote on approving the ASCE 2424 getting into the International Residential Code. Now, it is my understanding, I am not a veteran of the process, but it's my understanding the bar is a little bit higher at that hearing where it has to be a 2/3 vote. But given the positive comments that we received back from the committee at this latest hearing in terms of addressing their concerns, and also based on the misinformation that some of the committee members had stated in support of their no vote, we actually think that this is something that is a possibility. And so we are going to be working and strategizing again with the consortium of organizations, and that also includes ASCE itself, in how we might be able to approach that. So what you may see here over the next few months is a concerted effort, certainly to outreach to not only ASFPM members, but building code officials, directly through ASFPM chapters and otherwise. We're still kind of conceptualizing the approach that we might take. But it is something that again, it's something that, as one building official that was sitting in the hearing said in Cleveland, he said it does kind of create a bad scenario for building officials, because you're going to have a certain number of structures governed by the IBC, which will be to the ASCE 2424 standards, and then residential structures only having to go to what the IRC, the older IRC standards. So you're going to actually have two different code standards in floodplain areas, and it would seem to be a lot easier if if they were all consistent. So we are not certainly giving up on the residential side. And as I like to say, as I present this issue in chapter meetings, average annual flood losses in the nation have roughly doubled every decade since the 1990s. The 1990s, we were averaging about $5.5 billion a year. In the 2020s, we're averaging over $40 billion a year in flood losses. From a standard standpoint, the standards that we have are clearly not enough, at least to staunch those kinds of losses. And if we think about the 2030s and we're averaging 40 billion a year, does that mean in the 2030s we're going to be averaging $80 billion a year? That is simply untenable. So we hope to have more information out, but at least wanted to brief everybody since this is fresh, new information. Because at the end of the day, by having this standard and whether you adopt it directly into your floodplain management regulations at the local level, at the state level, or having it into your building codes, that is not dependent on the NFIP or the federal government. Rather, it is a resilience standard that is probably something that's very sorely needed across the nation. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks and be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Chad. It doesn't look like we have any questions, so that will be all the time we have today. Thank you all for attending. Due to the upcoming holiday season, our November and December national policy briefings will be combined into a single session. Please join us on Thursday, December 4th for our next briefing. We look forward to seeing you then. Bye now.